Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. What you'll notice over time in Canada with the Liberals and the online left in general is they only consider it democracy when they win. If they get the most votes in an election, then the popular will triumphed. And if they don't get the most votes, then the popular will was somehow subverted because, of course, whatever position they represent is the popular one. And if they lose an election, it's not because they don't actually have the most popular position. It means somehow people were disenfranchised or the thing that should happen didn't happen. This is actually the subject of my most popular video on the channel. I talked about a plebiscite that took place in the small town of Westlock, Alberta, that the left freaked out about because basically citizens of the town just voted so that they would make the public flagpoles only fly the town's flag, the Alberta flag, Canada's flag, and the Union Jack, and they would take down all the activist stuff. You can't fly the Pride Progress flag literally all year long. And this is a town that frequently elects progressives, but the townsfolk got a little bit annoyed with all the crosswalks and flags all the time, so they voted in a plebiscite to go back to pure neutrality. The left didn't like this, and they actually sent rainbow lawn signs to the town to scatter them everywhere to basically thumb their nose at people who just said, how about we just go back to Westlock being Westlock and not being a banner for whatever activist sort of trend you have going on now. It was the voters politely saying, let's just go back to Westlock being Westlock. It doesn't need to be like a downtown, it doesn't need to be downtown Portland over here. And the people got really mad at it, pretending like democracy had been subverted in favor of the evil fascist far right or whatever. It was very stupid. Now I need to get to another version of this going on right now. You will know the Liberals won the federal election, but that is not good enough because now they are mad at the Conservatives for actually taking the recount seriously, as well as people in the West signing petitions to have a referendum on separation. That is anti democratic, apparently. But before we get into it, guys, I just want to remind you if you like the channel and you like my political coverage, make sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are not yet a subscriber, and leave us a comment. It really helps us on the algorithm, and I do like to scroll through and hear what people have to say about the topic of the day. Now, here is a tweet from former NDP Ontario MPP Sherry DeNovo. She says, so now the Conservative Party are sending out the message that workers at Election Canada are somehow fixing recounts to benefit the Liberals. This is Trump and Maple MAGA at its absolute worst. Now, apparently, this makes the Conservatives Maple MAGA and Trump like because they're denying an election, apparently. No, they're not. There are like five extremely tight recounts going on around the country, and the Conservatives basically just put out an email saying, hey, you want to chip in some money in a donation so we can send lawyers to all of these ridings and be able to monitor the recounts to make sure that nobody's just going to start tossing in obviously illegitimate votes during it? Because you do want lawyers present so that if election workers are counting and they happen to have a political leaning one way or another, the lawyer can say, no, that's obviously an illegitimate ballot. Here's what the law says. The Conservatives didn't like accuse Elections Canada workers of being corrupt, but it is true that if a high stress recounts going on and you don't send any legal representation, you're going to be at a severe disadvantage. But now I just want to jump over to what Laura Babcock said about this because I find it so ironic based on things we're going to get to a little bit later. So she says, Canada, wake up. The MAGA threat is growing. They lost the election and will do anything to get power. Okay, the Conservatives know they lost the election. They conceded defeat. I don't know why they think that they're like doing anything for power. They're simply wanting lawyers to be president in some of these ridings like Terra Nova, where the Conservatives only lost by 12 votes, which obviously is requiring a recount. By the way, guess who also wants a recount and who wants to actually change the rules of the recount? The outgoing Liberal MP from the riding of Windsor Tecumseh Lakeshore. The CTV News article headline says ballots should not have been rejected. Windsor judge orders recount of election results. If this was a conservative candidate wanting this recount, if they had only lost by 240 votes, Laura Babcock and Sherry DeNovo presumably would be calling him a fascist or that he's an election denier or he's trying to subvert democracy. Because in fact, he actually technically wants them to subvert the rules of Elections Canada in order to count more ballots for him. What he wants them to do is take ballots with multiple marks on them, but if you really squint, you could say they maybe were trying to vote Liberal and count those. The problem with doing that, and I will link the article below so you can see that this is the argument they're making. The problem with doing this, it doesn't matter if you put an X behind next to someone's name and you put a check somewhere else, and you can kind of tell what they're trying to do, you're still not supposed to count it. Voting is very simple, and the problem is in every other riding around Canada, they follow the procedure that you mark the person you want, and if you put any more marks down, then that is not a vote that we can count. You have to mark who you're going to mark, and that's it. If the pencil line goes a little bit from one dot to the next dot, but it's obviously in this one, yeah, that's fair. But if you do like X over here, and then check over here, we're not counting it. And that is what the Liberal candidate, the outgoing Liberal MP in Windsor-Tecumseh Lakeshore, wants Elections Canada to do, which does require the Conservatives to have good legal representation in all these ridings, to point to election law, the Elections Act, and say you cannot do that. You cannot just fix every single ballot based on where your heart believes this person was trying to vote. The whole point is that they vote in a way that nobody has to even do that. But now let's move over to another issue, and it is Laura Babcock complaining about 51st state stuff and separatism. There's two clips here, and both of them are fairly unhinged, so I know one's more relevant than the other, but I still got to play both because they're hilarious. But they're complaining about referendums and petitions, which are a democratic procedure. It is a democratic tool you can use as a normal citizen, putting forward citizens' petitions, but that's very bad because it's representing things Laura doesn't like.
An air war of such constant disinformation and so many resources like American-owned newspapers in this country pushing this constant narrative that in fact separation is a possibility, that in fact there's an injustice done to Albertans.
I gotta say, I never understand the way that she films these things. She's just having a conversation with someone. She's like constantly sticking her eye in the camera. Like, this is really making her point even better. But regardless, she's now accusing places like the National Post of trying to get Canada to break up. There, you cannot find an article, as my friend JJ McCullough has pointed out, you cannot actually find an article from any major conservative newspaper advocating for separatism. There are people talking about separatists out there, but separatists are not actually as popular as people think. But Laura Babcock pretends that someone even mentioning the movement is going on is a subversion of Canada, and obviously, wow, it's an American-owned paper. That must mean that that's against Canada. The CBC is for Canada because it's government funded and it represents what establishment liberal politicians believe. But the National Post, having American ownership, but it's full of Canadian writers who have been there for absolute decades, that is bad. That is bad, and it's hurting Canada.
And the only fair, patriotic thing to do is to fight back and split away. We are being attacked as a country in a trade war and in a misinformation war. MAGA is not letting up. We had a good moment in the White House the other day. Carney showed that he can handle the moment.
What do you mean handle the moment? This lady was on the train of saying Carney's going to go down there and slap Trump in the face and he's not going to bend to Trump's will. Not that that was ever on the table like Poilievre was going to bend the knee. Nobody did. They just went down and they listened to him. If Poilievre was the prime minister, he would have behaved a lot like Mark Carney, but she was billing it like he was going to go down there and take on mini Hitler Trump. And that didn't happen, but she still spins it as some big victory.
But MAGA is not letting up. And these premiers are working against our national interests.
Yes. It is against the national interest that a premier, somebody who rules over a province, is letting their own citizens put forward a petition. Scott Moe and Danielle Smith are anti-democratic because they are not upholding the federal government's interest in the province by saying you can't even put forward a citizen's petition. You see what I mean? It's only democracy when they win. These people probably celebrate petitions, have probably celebrated referendums on issues they like. But as soon as you push forward one that they don't like, now it's not democratic. And I'm not saying this as someone who's pro-separatism. I'm anti-separatism. I just don't really care about the issue. I think it's very unlikely to succeed, and it causes a lot of problems in its lack of success, in the sense that it gives a lot of fuel to the Liberals federally, as well as the NDP provincially in Saskatchewan and Alberta. But they have a right to sign those petitions and try and get the issue on the ballot. That is their prerogative, but these people don't believe it.
Watching Ford and what he's doing in Ontario, which was pretty freaking scary.
Okay, and it's pretty freaking scary that Doug Ford, who I don't even like, wants to get rid of bike lanes in the city of Toronto, which are congesting traffic massively. When you eliminate lanes of traffic, obviously traffic is going to slow down. And he is trying to do an end run around a judge, rightfully so, who's trying to say that there needs to be a long, prolonged charter challenge over whether or not you can get rid of bike lanes. Because apparently bike lanes are now a charter right because of because a judge has declared it. And she is now considering him trying to uphold the actual will of Ontarians, because I don't like Doug Ford on most issues, but although I agree with him on the bike lanes issue, they just voted for him. And apparently a judge can block a premier and his party from doing this basic thing of just removing bike lanes, because apparently that's not democratic. We need to hear from an unelected judge on whether or not you can do something as basic as remove a bike lane. You know it's not a charter right to have a bike lane, because bike lanes did not exist when the charter was written, and nowhere did bike lanes spring up after the charter was written and it was signed in the 80s, because that's just not how that works.
In terms of, becoming all out autocratic with some stuff.
All out autocratic is referring to this bike lane issue. Literally, I'm not even kidding. That is the main issue people are referring to him as autocratic on.
Watching Danielle Smith stoke these separation fears, laced in bullshit and mired in scandal. The MAGA threat is still real in Canada.
I love these little clips of Laura Babcock. Watching her slowly lose her mind over things that are not real does give me a little bit of joy. But the biggest villains on this planet are people like Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and whoever's hiding Laura's lithium from her, because goodness, her mind is ripping in two based on just basic things in Canada happening day to day. Is Danielle Smith stoking fears of separatism? No, she's not. And not at all. She's like very much in the middle. She's against separatism, but she's not going to do something anti-democratic and block them like Naheed Nenshi and I believe what's her name? It's the NDP leader in Saskatchewan. I literally just said her name yesterday. We're going to look it up just to be nice. There you go, Carla Beck. But Carla Beck and Naheed Nenshi want them to greatly increase the petition signature requirement in order to get something on the referendum ballot, which would make it utterly impossible to get anything on the referendum ballot. Danielle Smith did lower the threshold from, I believe, like 600,000 to 176,000, but that's just going from something impossible to get in 60 days down to something that is actually attainable within about 120 days, I think is the limit now. If you're just some random guy wanting to get something on a petition in 120 days, 176,000 is impossible. You need a pretty big team to still do that in 120 days, but that's not good enough. It needs to be maybe 6 million in Laura Babcock's mind, in Naheed Nenshi's mind. It needs to be literally impossible to do, because that's when democracy succeeds, is when citizens do not actually have the right to put forward petitions they don't like. This is what I mean again. These people do not actually believe in democracy. They only believe in winning, and democracy is when they win. Anyways, so that should be it for me today, guys, in this video. Stay tuned in. If you don't have a subscription to this channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button. I usually come out with a video or two every day. Some stuff is very rambly like this. Other stuff is like one of my previous videos where I went over $33 billion of new spending that Mark Carney is putting forward, or it's the current numbers when it comes to separatist support in Saskatchewan and Alberta, which I will be diving back into in future videos, because I only touched on it a little bit in a previous video, more so talking about Danielle Smith's strategy for not wanting the separatists to succeed, but she also isn't going to hold them back and look like an anti-democratic like nag like Nenshi is. So again, if you like it all, like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and I will see you guys next time.